with Manny Escamilla, and he's running for city council. So basically what we did today, we went around the neighborhood and local businesses and talked to, different groups of people.
Right.
So my first question is,
Okay.
We spoke with business owners,
Mm-hmm.
and many of their concerns were, well, one of the concerns that I should talk about that I think it's important because it affected me when I was here, was the high rents.
Right.
When you get elected and everything happens for you, what are you going to do for those business owners?
And so the high rents are a bit of a challenge. We do live in a capitalist system with a free market, and then people can charge the rents that they're legally allowed to charge. The question for me is really more just like helping small businesses start up and making that process a lot faster. So what I personally see a lot in the city kind of administration, the way that it works is just to be able to open, you're basically paying like 3 months rent before you even start. So then that's a big hurdle for a lot of folks. So it might be that the rent could work or might be reasonable, but because it takes you 3 months to start up, and then that money is coming out or going out without any money coming in, that's a big challenge for a lot of folks. I think we can do a lot to speed up the process by which the city approves new small businesses, kind of faster permitting for new businesses, less fees. So right now we do this thing in the city of Santa Ana called the Certificate of Occupancy Fee. And it's basically like nowhere else in Orange County or Southern California. I've never seen this in another city, where basically we send out an inspector every time a new business opens up. So historically, the reason why the city did that was because it wanted to go out and send out inspectors to every new business because there were so many code violations out there. But now it's kind of a relic that basically slows down the speed of businesses starting up. So basically it will take you 2 weeks to potentially get an inspection. You get an inspection, there's an issue, and they basically tell you can't keep working. So you have this new business, you're kind of on pause, there's like a month or two that goes by, and then that can become an issue for small businesses as they start up. So that's the big thing I think that we can fix. It definitely is a challenge in order to make sure that the rents are reasonable, and then that is something that's much more about working with landlords to figure out kind of what the reasonable balance is between long-term leases that are stable, and then what people can afford out there. So that is a challenge.
Now, people don't know this, but I met you when I was in high school,
Right.
And you worked in the archives, in the history room,
Right.
in the public library. But then you also your next position was management, right?
Yeah, so it was this weird transition. So I basically was with the library and the archives for many years. I'd worked in the young adult department, basically the teen space program, so doing a lot of young adult programs, and also in the history room. So I kind of did that, half and half for a really long time. Transitioned to only over into the history room. So that was what I was mostly doing at the Santa Ana Library, was history programs. From there, I was actually invited to go work in the city manager's office by the former city manager, David Cavazos, who basically said, or had a program that would kind of pick different people out to go work up there for a year to rotate through in order to kind of understand the city administration overall. So I got picked for that. And it basically just changed the course of what I started working on. I was up there for a year, kind of learned about overall city operations, and then was asked by the then planning director, Hassan Nagani, to go work in the planning department. Okay. And with that, I kind of lucked out because he basically told him like, well, I'll go work for you, but I need to go back to get a master's in order to be able to know what I'm like doing over here in order to have a good fundamental base. Yeah. And he would help me out and kind of worked out with that. So I was able to both go to school and then work in the planning department for the last 3 years.
And what are your majors, so they know?
So my undergraduate degree is from Berkeley in history. So I have a history background there. Ended up getting my first master's from UCLA in libraries and archives, specializing in archives. So graduated from UCLA, I believe that was 2014. And then in 2018, I got my second master's from UCLA in urban and regional planning. Okay. Yeah, so focus on design and development. There's different specialties there.
So I think you have the tools, you have the work, and then you're very workaholic. I have to say, you don't party as much, or you work. That's all I know about you. And then today we also met, seniors. Yes. Seniors that are business owners, and again, they talk about their issues. What do you remember, and how you can help them?
Right. So it depends on kind of which seniors. I think for A lot of them it ended up being a matter of foot traffic, right? So the ones that we were talking to were mostly there with the fruit stands, and a lot of that boils down to figuring out ways to actually get businesses to start up. So if you don't have a lot of businesses that are open, not a lot of people go down there, and then therefore anyone that's kind of relying on foot traffic, those business models don't work. So it's about figuring out why certain buildings are empty, and with a lot of different situations, it ends up being figuring out what in particular is going on with that one landlord, fixing that problem, and then moving on to the next building and fixing that problem, right? So you have to take a very individualized approach because the reasons for the empty stores could be different. Right. And that's something we have to figure out. There are other cities that basically penalize empty stores. And basically because if you leave it empty for a really long time, there's more calls for services, there's an increasing chance that people are breaking into them. So there's a lot of things that some places do.
Is there I know for housing there's a rent control, but does that apply also for businesses or?
Well, the city of Santa Ana doesn't have rent control, and there's no rent control in Orange County, even at the residential scale. So that's something I believe the voters will have to decide if there's a statewide ballot initiative or if there's another local initiative that almost passed or almost got enough signatures during this last election cycle. So I believe the voters of Santa Ana should end up deciding that one. But there's nothing that I've really seen where it's basically commercial rent control. That one's been a little bit more of a tougher sell because what it ends up, you're never really quite sure how to implement that, if there's enough political support for it, or how it exactly works out. What I've seen that works out in a lot of instances end up either being long-term leases with kind of a guaranteed rate of growth over time, so you can budget for it, or programs, this probably more so during the 70s and the 80s, where you would help businesses basically buy up the building that they're in. That was one of those things that certain development companies did. So like the model in Chinatown, where basically a lot of the businesses there actually ended up owning their own land and were able to kind of stay over generations. So that's a big thing. It's harder to do now because we're pretty much at the top of this real estate market, so everything is extremely expensive. Right, so then even if you buy it now, you're paying just the mortgage alone in order to be able to pay it at its full value right now. That's really challenging. And to me, I think it's questionable, as far as like what these rental rates are and whether or not they're sustainable in the long run. Okay.
We also met with young adults, and then I remember she was talking about safety. How can you help if elected?
Right, so safety, I think it's a multi-pronged approach, right? So safety isn't just about having more officers, it's about having after-school programs to make sure the kids that could potentially go into wrong paths or just have negative turns in their lives, that they have early intervention and mentorship in order to get them out of that. So that's one component. Another component that we kind of think of right now, at least with safety, is that we have a lot of individuals that are either have mental health issues, have some kind of altercation in the system, and now are homeless and basically are stealing to survive, or just stealing and then kind of to support a drug habit. So there's a lot of things that are going on essentially because of what has become a crisis, right? We have a homelessness crisis and a housing crisis in this city and in this region. So in order to tackle the crime that she was talking about, a lot of it ends up going back to making sure that we have adequate housing for people that are essentially mentally ill and need to have some kind of permanent supportive housing. So that's one portion of it. Another portion of it then is figuring out how to do additional kind of evidence-based interventions with those that have drug problems. So then that's essentially where you're getting a lot of the break-ins and a lot of people that are more aggressive and not quite there, and have I think caused the most amount of issues as individuals that are on some kind of, not a narcotic, but some kind of upper, or just something that's basically throwing their system out of whack. And those are the people that are causing the most amount of issues. And then that one is a bit of more of a policing issue than the other groups of homelessness that are basically, other groups of homeless individuals that might be stealing to survive, and that is part of the crime as well. So those are, I'd say, 3 different groups, or if you kind of get a handle on that, we can try to lower the crime rate overall. Luckily in the city, we've seen that some of the community-based policing that we did in the 90s really helped trample down the amount of violence that we have in the city. So me growing up, I was used to gunshots every night. basically it had like three different shootings in front of my house, directly in front of my house. And that doesn't happen anymore. We really kind of like, there's kind of this huge surge of violence that went down. But what we haven't really been able to get a handle of are a lot of these quality of life crimes that, and that are, some considered lower grade, but it's typically if you kind of let things build up, then things get really out of control.
Right. Well, I remember when I used to live here, at the city plaza, there was a bunch of homeless, and I mean it didn't bother me because they were cool,
Right.
But is that still going on, or?
No, so the Civic Center did get cleaned up. So that was a big thing. So the city of Santa Ana has pretty much done more than just about any other city in order to take on this regional burden of homelessness. So we have a shelter that's there at the old bus depot. So it's an emergency shelter that's there. Then we have one more shelter that opened up on the east side of the city, one of the industrial tracks by Red Hill. Along with some more permanent supportive housing models that kind of popped up throughout the city. So the city's already done way more than it should, right, for its size, for the size of its economy, the number of residents and representatives. And at a certain point, it's basically figuring out the systems at the county level that are basically moving people in to Santa Ana that are homeless in other locations.
Like, do you remember, like in Anaheim, the river band that people were living there?
Right.
So what happened to them? Did they came here?
Well, a lot of them ended up being pushed out of the riverbed, and then they ended up in the streets of Anaheim, Fullerton, and Santa Ana. And what you end up kind of seeing is, if there's a large concentration, people gravitate towards that, but then if they get spread out, then it's everywhere. So it's always kind of this like balance of finding out where people can actually live, and I was talking to someone who was at the shelter here in the downtown. He essentially said, they're having like major problems with bed bugs. That there's that there are no nurses on site. So if anyone has a medical issue, there's no kind of treatment there, even though it's a high risk population. And that even simple things like the laundry doesn't work. So now you have people that are unable to kind of like clean their clothes. That basically end up having to wear dirty clothes for months at a time because they're no longer have access to laundromats. And then that was one of the basic things that we're supposed to provide there. So there are a lot of little broken links in that system. And what I want to try to do is understand where these broken links are, talk to as many people as possible, and figure out which ones we can fix, which ones we can afford, and then hopefully again working together that adds up to part of the solution. But it is a challenge, because even middle class families are having a hard time keeping a roof over their head. So this is even with homelessness, it's a lot of people that basically fell on hard times, and those are the ones that basically become homeless and they bounce back, right? So there's some folks that essentially need to just kind of keep a job for a few months that have had a job, and they're just kind of waiting for the next paycheck to put the down payment. And those are the ones that basically go into our emergency system and are able to bounce back. But then there's an entire other population that just is completely locked out. And there's a whole mess of reasons for that, but each one of those needs to be addressed. And that would really, I think, make places safer, really try to essentially create the type of city that we're looking to create. And these are big systemic problems that we all have to work on together.
Yeah, we also met two groups. One that was homeless.
Right.
The other was a business owner, gay community.
Right.
How are you gonna improve our community within the city?
Right, and by your community, you mean the LGBTQ community?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a lot of communities, and Santa Ana was always probably embraced the LGBT community more so than other cities, but I also think that what it's done is embrace a working class LGBTQ community. And that was news to me that we don't have any kind of LGBTQ friendly shelter in the area. So I would definitely, as a council member, be looking into and approving ways that we can figure out how to have an appropriately trained staff and center that does deal with special needs that come in from being an LGBTQ member. And a lot of that ends up being that we just have to understand that higher risk for homelessness, higher risk for being involved in the penal system, and also that it's there's a lot more likelihood than basically a family's not being able to be their support model. So how do you then create that second family or that second support network? And if the West Hollywood model is working for them, and definitely would like to take a look at that and see how that can be incorporated.
Yeah, because that would that would save lives. I remember Well, since high school, I can think of 3 people that not that far away from here, because it happened in 17 and Main Street. She was born male, but then eventually she wanted to transition. She was kicked out of the house and she got killed. She was found in the dumpster.
In Zenobia?
I think so, yeah. Or, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
Remember?
I went to school there. Yeah.
So, I think that if we had a center, that can kind of, encourage them to do something better with their lives or to be in and protect them, that could have been a life that, could have been saved. I mean, that's just one.
Right.
The other one, he got very, very sick. He didn't have money. And then I don't know if you know this, but the pills are very, very expensive. So if you don't have a job that has insurance, not that insurance covers it, but most of the medicine, yes, they're dying because they don't have the medication. So if we had like a center that maybe can, I don't know, cater to not just us, but in general, I think that would help a lot.
Right, and then there definitely with that connection, it's like the national talk around Medicare and healthcare for all, and that's something I think that the Democratic Party is pushing because it's a very real need, right? Like basic medical care should not be something that people die from the lack thereof.
When I was growing up, just on it's called El Torito. It's a restaurant for those of you that don't know, but I remember right in front of it there was a bus stop, and I think it's still there.
Okay.
But it was famous because not only because of their food, but immigration would stop and then would get off and then just grab a bunch of people and then throw them in there. Are we safe? Are people that are not, that are illegal, are they safe in this city?
So the undocumented population here doesn't really have anything to fear from our local PD. So the city council, as it stands, is very protective of our undocumented community because we have a lot of, quite honestly, we have a lot of American citizens that are dependent upon undocumented family members, and that we think that it's basically causes trauma, is not in the long-term interest of the city in order to kind of partner with any sort of federal agency. The problem becomes how aggressive and what the city can actively do in order to stop federal actions. So there's one thing that the city can do is not participate, but then it's the other thing as far as stopping actual enforcement actions from the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. Or what the city can do to lower the threat. I think quite honestly a lot of the nonprofit groups that we have that have been educating individuals about their rights, that has really helped out. So we definitely have, I think, more of an awareness in this community about the rights of not needing to open the door unless you have a valid search warrant from a judge versus just someone who shows up with an ICE detainer, which is written by an administrator, not by a judge. So letting people know about their rights, having kind of rapid response networks in the community, I think is the way to go. The city itself has less ability to do that. We're still constrained by basically California and federal laws. So we can't really interfere, can't help. Okay.
Now, we also met with young people who are either at the path of becoming voters, legal to vote. What would you tell them?
So here's the thing. It's like the city of Santa Ana has this unique potential to be representative of a youth vision of the future of what American democracy looks like. Like that opportunity is here. If you look at the voting profile or the voting graph, we basically have 65-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and typically what it ends up being is there's usually kind of a U shape, where you have a lot of people that are old and just super old and can't vote anymore, they just pass away. And then you have a lot of middle-aged voters, and then it all kind of dips down into people that are registered that are 18 barely. So you have this big middle kind of round, and this is really where all the votes come in from people that are older. In the city of Santa Ana, it has this L shape, where basically there's very few older residents and voters, and then there's a little bit more in the middle, And then when you get to like the youth vote that are registered, it's huge. They're just like, it's basically is equal to like the rest of the pie if you look at only like 18 to 25. So if they voted like at the same rates, they basically run the city.
Okay.
So that's the thing I say, like, you could, like, if you don't believe it, like, just look at the numbers and look at the registration data with the voter registrar. That's it. It's a little L shape. And that's what always surprises me, because, you know, those demographics only happen basically once in a generation when you have a youth bulge and, like, a voter, like, those voter trends. So if the youth ever wanted to kind of, like, take over the political establishment of the city, it's going to happen within the next, within these next 10 years.
All right. Well, I think we cover a lot.
You did.
But thank you so much for having me here.
Okay.
And please remember to vote.
Voting November 5th. So that would be this year, November 5th for 2019 in a special election. All Santa Ana residents that are registered to vote, I believe before October 21st, will be eligible to vote in this election.
Yay! Hi guys, so we just finished Manny Escamilla's video. So please subscribe, please share, and let us know what you think.